as we go through our day, like doing our job, so much of our job is like filling in gaps that we have in order to meet a certain performance expectation that I think we're like learning all the time, but you don't know you're doing it till way later.
Get them in the process, get them doing, and through that then they know, and I'm probably more intrinsically motivated to then go and find the content because they're like, shit, this was hard. Like I didn't actually know how to do that.
I think you've got to be able to hone in really quickly on what it is you're trying to do.
Starting with the thing, getting them to do the thing has this benefit as well of getting people to realize, like it almost brings it into that like conscious incompetence realm of like, oh, actually I don't know how to do this and therefore I'm actually going to really pay attention.
But only like 3 months later could I look back and put a word to and quantify what the thing was that I learned. Or this technical concept is probably something they should be aware of, but do they need it right now? And if they don't need it right now, they're either going to forget it or they're going to be upset that we made them take it. There's no time to kind of leisurely learn anymore.
What's next for you, Lizzy? And what value would you like to embrace into that?
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
Lizzy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. So I'm going to start with a question around your personal approach to learning. You are a busy professional, like all of us. You have very little time. How do you learn?
Very little time. So if I have to formally learn, I think I get up really, really early. Like I get up at 4 a.m. if I have to learn something. So I recently started teaching at UC Denver, and it was a new LMS. It's new content. It's my alma mater, but not in that way. And so for an entire semester, I was up at 4 a.m, and that's when I would do like formal learning, right? Like I would open my journal articles. What's my content going to be? What's my outline? But that is so rare when that happens for me. And I think it's
the waking up at 4 a.m. or the formal?
No, that part's super normal. Okay. That part's super normal.
Yeah. You have twins. So,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
The formal learning part.
Yeah.
And I think as we go through our day, like doing our job, so much of our job is like filling in gaps that we have in order to meet a certain performance expectation that I think we're like learning all the time, but you don't know you're doing it till way later. So like my husband fixing the furnace, he's on YouTube watching videos. Well, it wasn't the pilot light. It's not this. He's troubleshooting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he'd call that learning.
Yeah.
I think he would say he's trying to fix the furnace.
Yeah.
And so for me, if I've got, say, like an issue with someone on my team, they need coaching. Or if I have a problem I'm trying to solve for my audience, I might have to go research something in a really targeted way. Like my search terms will be super focused. If it's more than a 4-minute read, I'm not going to open it. And so I think, that idea of learning in the moment of need, who is that? Gottfriedson and Mosher, right? So learning when you need it and applying it immediately, that's how we have to work as busy parents and professionals. Like you can't, there's no time to kind of leisurely learn anymore. And most companies I don't think can afford that. I think you've got to be able to hone in really quickly on what it is you're trying to do. Like my husband's not going to go in the basement when the furnace is broken and like watch a video about the water heater.
Just
right.
in case.
Yeah. This would be nice to know. While I'm like, I'm freezing up here.
Yeah.
So it really is really being able to define the problem and find the learning that supports the answer.
Yeah. There's two parts. I'm going to come back to this one because I wrote it down. The other one is that do you see that reality played out in the workplace, or do you see still this idea that, oh, we need to hit a certain quota of learning every year, so therefore you should do this train, and it's like that just in case stuff that doesn't feel impactful?
So I don't know that we have a culture of just learn for learning's sake or hit a quota necessarily. I think we have, maybe at the company I work at, we have this will be important someday, or this is a nice to know, or this technical concept is probably something they should be aware of, but do they need it right now? And if they don't need it right now, they're either going to forget it, or they're going to be upset that we made them take it, or I'm going to spend their time, thus your money, on this learning event. So I can do this now, or I can make it available, say on demand, or I can say 6 months from now, when I think they're probably actually going to use it, we can assign it then, and we can do it on auto. And so I think there's a lot of like creative solutions that we can offer as L&D to the business that says, I'm still going to give them this, but I'm going to do it at the right time in the right way for a very targeted audience.
All right, so I want to go back to this point you said earlier with your husband and the furnace. You're learning all the time, but you don't realize that until later. That last part feels quite important here, right? Because like there's a lot of talk about. We were talking about this with one of the first guests. Learning is a process, right? It's not an event that you go to, right? It's an ongoing process. There's talk, learning in the flow of work, all of these things. So like that idea is there. We're learning all the time, but we don't realize it until later. So how do you think about that and like making learning explicit for people to be like, hey, you actually learned here?
So I think that's super true. And if you were able to kind of pull yourself out of the experience that you're having, with kids, we call that like metacognition, right? So thinking about your thinking.
Yeah.
Or with adults, I'll call it a double track agenda. Take notes on what you're learning, but also write down what you're thinking as this is happening. But that awareness is not the point when you're at your job. Like at your job, your work is to go accomplish something that helps the company, right? And I think that's a lot of balls to be juggling for someone who is just trying to get their job done. So I think that kind of retroactive reflection about like, wow, I've really come a long way, happens to a lot of us. So I've been on like a hockey stick of learning lately. I've been exposed to a bunch more things at Johnson Controls, and because of that, I just kind of had this low level like stress, like I knew things were happening. I knew I was facing opportunities to grow and develop, but only like 3 months later could I look back and put a word to and quantify what the thing was that I learned. And I don't think it would have helped had my boss said to me like, Lizzy, you're going to be exposed a lot more around the skill of executive presence. Here's what I need you to do, because that's mine, right? Like that's personal. She probably knew it and gave me opportunities to go immerse myself in the skills I would need to develop for executive presence. But my reflection 3 months later was like, oh, wow, I see what was happening there now. But that's because it's so personal. And I think that's why learning's so hard kind of as an industry, is because it really is so personal for the person on the journey.
So you have a good relationship with learning, like you're an educator, right? And that doesn't come easily to everyone, right? And so how do you help with that? Like that attitude and that mindset that you just described, like how do you help people have that light bulb moment?
That's a good question. I do have a good relationship with learning. Sometimes it's a love and sometimes it's a hate, but I always know it's going to be good for me, even when it does give me that kind of like stress feeling, or, I understand it and I understand the like science of it and how to kind of get through it and to be patient with it. I didn't always feel that way. Like I didn't always have kind of like this is normal, everybody goes through this as they grow. But I think it was just being immersed in that constantly. Like exposing myself constantly to new things and new opportunities. So when I think about translating that for people that we serve and audiences that we serve, it's that zone of proximal development idea, right? So give you a little, stretch it more, but I'm not going to terrify you by giving you a learning experience that is so far outside your comfort zone that you give up on the topic. I'm going to expose you in pieces and in chunks and over time. And I think, I do think, going back to your comment about making things explicit and naming them, like we do that with kids, right? Like we say, here's your learning objective. And actually a lot of adults do that. Like a lot of the presentations over at ATD this week, they've got learning objectives. Where I think we could do even better is if we were to say, here's the thing you're going to learn, here's the skill you're going to practice, here's the way I'm going to teach it to you. Like with kids, we had these learning objectives that had all the parts, like they were really broken down. And with adults, I think we make an assumption that they can kind of read through our jargon, or they can see through it, you know? They'll know what I mean. And it's like, but do they?
Yeah. And I love that you keep bringing up childhood learning and development, because as parents, right, like it's so like in your face, so you can't avoid it. And there are so many similarities, and you're right, like we kind of make these assumptions about adult learners that are maybe not always true, like because of the complexities or whatever like involved in that. So this leads me to the next question I had for you. You're a scientist and taught science, and so that that's a big part of it. I know nothing really about that world from the educational perspective, so I'm curious what you've learned about that world, what you've learned from that world about adult learners.
So I think, first of all, if we taught adults like we taught kids, I think it would be amazing. Like, I only think it's more explicit, less convoluted, less complicated. Like, we make it really great for kids. We talk about instructional strategies. How are they going to learn this best? How are they going to enjoy it? How are we going to get their engagement? And a lot of times with adults, we just throw it out, right? Like, it's like, figure it out. 3 hours worth of content that I'm talking to you about. And I know we move away from that. Like, people know so much more about learning now. But I think the way we do things with children, the care we take, we should take with adults, because it feels good when people take care of us and our learning and our development in that way.
That's a really good point.
There was, when I taught science, I taught all the sciences, chem, bio, physics, and I started with a super discrete topic. Like my first year teaching, I think I taught astronomy. What? Like how random. And then I taught earth science and all these sciences. But in about my 6th year of teaching, I taught this course called physical science. And physical science was in your 9th grade science. It's like the gateway to high school science. And I'm sure things have changed in terms of like the standards and, curriculum and things. But in physical science, you didn't learn a domain. You learned how to take temperature. You learned how to make a hypothesis. What is a good observation? How am I going to use a balance to get mass? And what that did, pulling those skills out in front, naming them as skills you were going to use for the next 3 years, not only gave kids confidence, but it made the chemistry go way faster. Like so I don't have to talk about, okay, now put this powder on the balance. Let me teach you how to take mass quickly, and then I'll teach you about chemical reactions. Like, we didn't mix drinks. It was, here's the things you're going to need to be able to do to enable your content learning later, because it's super hard to learn new content and new process at the same time. And I liked that. We did that at work recently. We were given a huge project, like a library of new offerings we were going to go support. And a lot of them had elements of sales in them. And a lot of them almost all of them have elements of customer conversations in them. So instead of taking these discrete offerings and teaching skills within them, we pulled them forward. And we are doing drip campaigns over time of these skills that then enable the offerings to go be sold more successfully.
Mac, maybe you were talking about this earlier. There's and I can't remember. I've done so many of these podcasts in a row right now, so that I won't be able to give you exactly where it came from. But this idea of by starting with that, I think you were talking about this, right? Starting with the thing, getting them to do the thing, has this benefit as well of getting people to realize, like, it almost brings it into that like conscious incompetence realm of like, oh, actually I don't know how to do this, and therefore I'm actually going to really pay attention to whatever, you know, and that to me feels like you were talking about process versus content, right? So like, get them in the process, get them doing, and through that then they know, and I'm probably more intrinsically motivated to then go and find the content, because they were like, shit, this was hard, like I didn't actually know how to do that.
Well, and like maybe they're like really into it. Like, okay, I can weigh this now. How am I going to use this?
Yeah,
like it
yeah.
opens that wondering up of like, where else will I go do this? Like, well, okay, what am I going to weigh in biology? What am I going to weigh in chemistry? And to be able to remove the nervousness around, well, maybe I don't have the skills for this, allows people, it's that safety layer of Maslow, right? Like, I know that I can at least accomplish this part of this experiment, so I'm going to go be able to learn the content.
Yeah, I know what the next step, then you get, exactly. Okay. So many things to go in there, but let's move forward. Okay, so
you don't want to talk about kids and science anymore. I
we're
can
gonna
do
keep
this all
going
day.
back. We're definitely going to keep going
kidding.
back to kids, though. I love that side of it. Let's talk about how learning and problem solving are very similar, right? Like, learning is this process of solving problems, like identifying the thing you don't know, figuring out how to do that. What is problem solving like? Trying to figure out how to ask this without being like such a dumb, obvious question, but like, obviously it's an important part of leadership, right? Like, how do you think of it like, how do you approach problem solving as a capability to build?
I think we don't spend enough time on analysis. And so I really like that phase of just getting really soaked in the analysis of what we're talking about. And I think also, like, problem can be a goal. Like, problem is a word that can mean many things.
It's problematic.
So many, right? Exactly. So it can be a goal you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. A positive thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we think about how to do that well, I really like helping people understand, like, a great needs analysis is just awesome, right? Ask all the questions, annoy your SMEs, like annoy your stakeholders in trying to understand the problem. And I think what that does is it tells you what you can't do. And once you know what you can't do, your solutions are fewer in number and probably a lot more accurate and correct. And so removing the things that won't work by really soaking in the analysis, I think it takes patience. It takes persistence. It takes a little bravery, because you know you're going to annoy some people and like, didn't you just ask me that? Why is this taking so long? When they really just wanted you to throw a job aid at it.
Yeah, exactly.
And being courageous enough to say, like, this isn't going to solve your problem. It's not like, it doesn't invalidate you as a learning partner. I think it makes you more of like a business partner. It's like, I could make that. I will make that if you really want me to, but let me understand what you're trying to achieve so that I can target a solution for you that's probably going to help a whole lot more.
And what does that process look like? I mean, is it just like very a significant amount of interviews and like analysis and synthesis of information? What other things have worked for you to kind of start to look at problems differently?
This is so cheesy. I always take walks. Like, I can't do it at a desk in front of a computer. Yeah. And yes, you have to do all those things you talked about, but I think the need for white space in our brains is so underrated right now. And the best solutions I've ever come up with were walking my dog, or gardening, or painting a fireplace. Like, I don't know, like random stuff that had, but I did those things without AirPods, without going on a walk with a friend, because I know myself. And if I do not take time to just let it rumble in my brain, I can come up with something, but is it going to be like the best solution I have to offer? Probably not. And I think we live in a time when noise and stimulation are so high that it's hard to really just kind of close your eyes and imagine what a possibility could be. that's, for me, that's always been more beneficial. You do all those things, you interview, but the time to think is evaporating in companies.
Yeah. Yep.
The pace is fast. The pace of change is fast. The need is fast. Money, the financial aspect of time is just really present. And so I think to say, I'm going to take a walk.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky I have leadership who believes in that. And I think our whole company believes in that, but we need to be the people who pause and think to provide great solutions.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's tons of literature in the creativity space around that, the importance of, active rest and Einstein famously
me and
goes for
Einstein.
things. Yeah, exactly. But how do you you listed through the challenges of this so I'm thinking of it now let's look at it from a capability building perspective. How do you build that in as a capability for a business where you're saying pause,
So I personally, I never ask them to pause. I ask them to give me time to pause. And so oftentimes if people come in with solutions, I always say sure, I can do that. And if you would like another idea, I just need a couple days or something like that. But that partnership, and to be a true partner to the business, I think that is where that kind of leadership capability of courage and bravery and persistence comes in. You need to have built a good enough relationship and to have proven yourself enough times where then what you deliver does actually meet the goal. And it's better than they could have imagined. That's that customer service piece, right? Stakeholders as customers.
Yep. And when we were prepping for this, you talked about tying job satisfaction to problem solving. How does that fit in?
Was I talking about my own job satisfaction?
I think so.
Probably.
You love solving problems.
I do. I think it's the analysis. I really just think looking at this from different perspectives, considering doing a pre-mortem. How is this going to end? What could go wrong? That's the favorite question of parents everywhere. What could go wrong?
Yep.
And so kind of forecasting what that might look like. I get a lot of energy from that. I actually think, I wonder if that's also why I like my audience so much. They are problem solvers. They're troubleshooters. You have a mechanic, we don't do cars. Obviously we do, major pieces of equipment, but you pull your car into a body shop and says it's making a noise. There's a lot of energizing thought that goes into I'm going to find out where that noise is coming from. And so it's not here. You work down the decision tree of it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. What might it be? I think there's so much satisfaction from figuring something like that out that I guess I'm not surprised I like the skilled trades as my audience because it's a sensibility, right? It's a want to fix something or a want to solve a puzzle. If you like true crime podcasts or mystery books, I think it's the same sensibility.
Yeah.
And if you get energized by that, and if you are someone who even finding out the answers no, you're still I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to keep going. I like that. And that gives me a lot of energy.
And it's something that you find in your audience as well.
Yeah.
Naturally, it exists there already. Do they carry that same energy into training? Do you ever run into that challenge of okay, this feels like it's training is this thing I have to go do outside of my work? Do you ever have to deal with that mindset?
I think so. I think we do, but probably less than maybe other audiences, because what we're offering is really truly hands-on in many cases. You're going to go learn how to do this thing on a piece of equipment that you're going to go service in a week. And actually what we've done a really great job of is ensuring that timeliness of learning, that it is happening in the moment of need. We are very careful, or try to be very careful, about pushing things out that people will use soon. And it's been a culture shift, but I do see it happening. And so I don't really see a whole lot of resistance in this audience. I think there's a whole lot more gratitude for providing solutions because they are out there alone on customer sites every day trying to fix stuff.
Yeah.
And when we teach them a new trick or tool, I think they have a lot of gratitude.
Yeah, they're problem solvers. They're out there solving problems, and so you're enabling that. You're
Yeah.
supporting in that. Yeah,
Giving them a tool for their toolbox.
Yeah, exactly. We talked through. So how you're doing a lot of stakeholder interviews, SME interviews. You're gathering like what those tools are. I guess like how are you thinking ahead of the game? Like, what do these people need in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months?
That is exactly what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
So we are really adopting a model of hire to retire learning. And it's not like a lifelong learning concept. It is truly like at what stages of your career do you need support from learning? And I think at different stages of your career, you're going to need support from all various parts of an organization. But like, what are the ones where you're going to be filling a knowledge or a skill gap? And we've really decided it's onboarding, getting better at the job you have, and then getting the job that you want. And so for onboarding, we've divided onboarding into company onboarding, foundational science basics, like how to use a psychrometer or hand tools, or what's humidity, how does fire transfer, because that's the pull forward, right? That's the pull forward of the foundations and the skills that then we talk about. The third and final phase of onboarding is what's your role at our company and how are you going to go apply all this stuff we just talked about on a day-to-day basis. So then this getting better at the job you want and the career pathing part, getting the job that you want in the future, or so the job you have and the job you want. You have to really understand what good looks like in those roles. And for a company of our size and geographical distribution, that's incredibly complex. And so I think you just start with one, right? You start with one, you build it out, you test it and get feedback. But I think you have to know where you want people to move to, and then you have to be able to do a really solid gap analysis. So like, if this is what it looks like and we've got most people here, what's the learning that can help them fill that gap?
Yeah. What's the most challenging part of your job?
It's the complexity and the volume of the audience. So we're serving probably 25,000 global mechanics and technicians, engineers, project managers, and it's like our North America population, we had to kind of cap at 25 roles. So it's just incredibly complex. And the work of our business is so technical and so complicated. It could be daunting if you let it be.
Sounds like
but
it is.
We look at it as exciting and as an opportunity. And I think what we've done is try to start to chunk support. What is true for everybody? What's the learning that is true for everyone, and how do we teach that in a way that's accessible to everyone? What's the stuff that's only true for a few people, and how does deployment look different when it's only for a few people? But it's really complicated. And I think we talked about this, and I think the answer might be not much, but how much like leadership development stuff comes into this? Because like the career pathing piece, it does sound like there is an element of that. Like, where are these people going, and leadership is a part of that. Like, to what extent are you baking that into the stuff you're working on? Yeah, that's actually a really great question, because it is definitely a focus it has always been a focus for like career pathing, but it needs to be a focus for everything. So in our first 4 days of onboarding, we teach a communication class. How are you communicating effectively with teams, with peers? It's that important and critical to our company that people are able to resolve conflict and things like that, in a healthy way. Everyone leaves their onboarding program with an individual development plan. And so these are like the first tastes. Like, this is your first 12 weeks of work, and you're leaving with a plan for your training for the next year and things like that. So it is definitely a focus. It needs to be, and is becoming, a much more embedded focus. We have a leadership development program that's amazing, and we need to make sure that we bake it in instead of having it be something else, because like we all know, leadership happens at every single level. Like everyone can be and should be a leader.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So so it is a part of it, and it's an expectation for people. So yeah, I'm curious how agency fits into this, because it's come up in a lot of the conversations, this idea of that being a way to respond to change, right? Like having agency, not to see change as something that happens to me, but that I can impact. And is that something you think about at Johnson Controls? Like how does that fit in?
Like ownership?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to onboard you in a very specific way so that you can be safe. And really, so much of it comes down to our safety culture. Like, we cannot let somebody loose on a customer site who hasn't been trained to a certain level of effectiveness. But after that, the complexity that I talked about as being hard is actually an awesome opportunity for the people who work at our company, because there's so many ways that you can go apply things that you learn. And if you want to completely stop and try something totally new, go from HVAC to fire. Like, it's completely different, or security. And so thinking about the opportunity, I think people have a lot of agency. And then we have there's a lot of choice of different ways you can go. Even a mechanic could be a mechanic or a chiller mechanic. They could, want to stay a mechanic forever, but be an amazing one and take courses that way that deepen their, expertise. Or maybe they want to be a leader. Maybe they want to go lead groups of mechanics who are out in, a state helping all the customers in that state. To fix their equipment. So I think it's more about opportunity, and then we'll support that with, learning opportunities as they want.
As they need, yeah. I'm curious, the topic of change hasn't come up a lot in our conversation. I'm wondering how much of the work that you're working on with these technical teams does change play a role, in that these safety settings, I'm assuming as well, are things that are pretty well thought through and solid, and maybe don't change that much, but I could be wrong. How much does that impact you?
So the safety arm, it might evolve, but it's pretty basic about stop work, wearing your PPE, that kind of stuff. But what does change is the equipment or process or technologies that these people are working on. And I think it's probably one of our tip top awarenesses right now is the pace of change, and the way that we are automating buildings is changing so rapidly. So the pace and the scale of change has been phenomenal, even since I've been at Johnson Controls. And you think about what you see in buildings, how much a building has changed that you just walk into. Our technicians and mechanics are servicing those changes. They're getting data from things that they never got data from before.
What to do with all this.
Yeah, exactly. How to make sense of it, how to talk to customers about it. So I went on a ride along with a guy, and I thought, I'm going to go to this building and I'm going to see all these big chillers, and it's going to be I'm going to wear my hard hat. And he's like, you want to see my office? I was like, oh yeah. And we go into a cubicle, and I was like, oh wait, what's up? And he's typing on his computer, and I was like, well, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm programming this, whatever I'm programming. And I thought, oh wow, I would have thought that it looked a little different. He's like, well, it used to. And he had this file cabinet. It was probably 4 drawers, and it was really wide. And he opened one, and it was filled with that long white ticker tape that had holes in it. He's like, this is how I learned to program. And
Wow.
And now he's on a computer beep, bop, beep.
Yeah.
And I was like, this audience is change ready. They are flexible.
Yeah.
They are adaptable. They walk into sites not having a clue about sometimes what they're going to go solve, and they walk out with satisfied customers. And so I think this audience is used to and ripe for change. I think what is different is the pace and scale. And so we think about it a lot. We've actually stood up a team in the last couple of years who that's their whole focus, a change management team. And what we see, I think most frequently, is that we are saturating our teams with change, but it's because we have great new products, great new services, but the work becomes how to make that digestible, how to allow people the space to process those kind of changes.
Yeah. And so how do you make that digestible?
Right. So I think a few things. Pacing of releases, pacing of new information, redundancy in communication. Like, you have to say it a bunch of times and in a bunch of different ways. So is it posted? Is it printed? You know, this audience isn't super connected always to their phones. If they're on a customer site on a rooftop, they might not have Wi-Fi. And so how are you communicating with them becomes critically important. We have a lot of things we want to go do and accomplish. And it really is sometimes saying, okay, we're going to slot that for this time in the calendar. And I think that's been challenging, but in the end, everyone's aligned to, like, we need these technicians and mechanics or skilled trades to be able to absorb what we're giving them.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the questions that you will have seen, because I know I've thrown a bunch at you that we didn't prep
That's
for.
all right.
But those are usually the best as well. He says, hopefully. If you had to prioritize a focus area, and you had to choose between, enabling people to lead through change leadership, or you had to choose retention, right, of like high potential, top talent, whatever. How are you making that choice?
Well, right now, I don't even think it's about retention of top talent. I think it's about retention of our skilled trades. So the Census Bureau has some statistic out right now that there's like 4 million job openings in construction, transportation, and mechanical. And they're also predicting a quarter of the skilled trades will retire in the next decade. So there is war is an aggressive term, but there's like a war on talent, and you want to keep your talent, because if you are constantly churning talent, it doesn't matter if you're great at change management, the people are gone. Like, change needs to be applied to people who are here yesterday. And so I think first we get them in the door, then we keep them, and then we make sure that they're not leaving because we are oversaturating them with new things, right? But the retention piece in the industry that we're in is so critical right now, and it's probably already really changing. So we've got to expand our pipeline in, and we're really partnering with community colleges a lot in new ways. And then to become the employer of choice, we're saying we're going to invest in you, and we're going to train you, and we're going to make you, because that's job satisfaction, right? I know how to do my job. I have the skills and capabilities, and I'm rewarded for doing a good job. And so I don't think it's an either or, but I don't think you can apply great change management if you have constant turnover.
Yeah, that's great. That's a very different answer to this question, which I've asked for everyone so far. So yeah, it's great to hear that perspective.
Right?
Yeah,
way better.
Clearly, yeah. I don't have the facts with me, so this is a risk kind of bringing this up, but I feel like I read something recently that there has been an uptick in community colleges, people learning trades, and that's like a thing that is changing. Is that true? It
might be true. What you might be reacting to is all of us in these industries like advertising like crazy, like come work with us, come join us, because
of this war on talent.
And we recognize that we're going to be losing a lot of people to retirement, and we need to open up new avenues for new types of students to come and do the trades. And so, I think there's an awareness out there, and there is definitely a conversation about it. I don't know if the stats are higher, but I do know that the amount we're talking about it is significantly increased. And I wouldn't be surprised if people are starting to prepare for that.
Interesting. I mean, I know so little about this world, and it's just fascinating to kind of...
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
And like so our president of BSNA of North America, she was like, these are life-sustaining careers.
Yeah.
Like, I hire a lot, and I can't afford mechanics who are like in the end of their career because they have built such a, you know, a level of expertise that is so highly valued. It doesn't make financial sense for them to leave, you know, later in their career, which is awesome. We need it. They deserve it. They're amazing.
Right.
It's hard physical labor. It's hard mental labor.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a lot about awareness for people. And I was in teaching in schools when we went through this push of everybody goes to college. Right? Like I was in Denver, downtown, and we were committed that every single student was going to get into a 4-year college, for better or for worse. Well, I lived next to a kid, George, and his dad owned a carpet business. And his second year out of high school, George was making more money than me as a teacher. And so why did George get into why did he waste his application money? Like that kid had a plan. Like let the kid install carpet. Like it was a great life for his family.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to this a little bit. The idea of child through adolescence, through early adulthood education, because there is such a standard way of doing things, right? And everyone like goes as the career path, the default path, right? And it's just like I think it's created a lot of problems that lead to the sort of leadership crisis that we have now, where people they've never failed before, right? Like and they've also never had to think for themselves. All those paths have been laid out for them. And so then you finally get into the workplace and you get challenged with some complexity and you can't handle it and it's a meltdown, right?
Yeah.
And so, so I think the idea of like, there's more openness to alternative educations, even trade schools, it's kind of an alternative path to the default one. I mean, that's a great anecdote with George. Like, do you think, I don't know if really what my question is in here, other than just kind of getting excited about the fact that there are opportunities that can get people out of that default state, because we've kind of gotten a little too far into it.
Yeah, I think we really swung the pendulum, and I think a lot of it was this like wanting to help kids achieve goals, right? But like, who's determining the goal? And the goal might look super different. And is it an all-encompassing conversation that we're having? Like, it is a great career to be a technician who's going to go on job sites and construction sites and, put wires in that make the building run. Right. And I don't know, it might be about awareness.
Well, especially because you're saying like your mandate in Denver was to like get people into college. So it's like there's a systemic problem here, right? Like that needs to change.
Yeah. And kind of like why is that better? Like who's saying that's better?
Right.
Like, are we equally giving airspace to all the different types of careers?
Yeah.
No.
We're
not.
Yeah, clearly. I thought that was rhetorical, but yes.
I was waiting for your answer.
This has been great. I think you've opened up again. Like, I didn't know a lot about this world, and so it's been for me an education just to sit here and across from you and listen to this. I've got a lot more questions that we don't have time for today, so I'm going to go to the last one, which is to ask what's next for you, Lizzy, and what value would you like to embrace into that?
My aperture around learning has seriously been opened since we started talking at my job about career, talent pipelines, workforce development, labor. Like, that was a world. I'm a teacher, right? Like, I liked learning for learning. I taught in K-12. I do academia. Like, the whole point of what I did was learning. And now to put it in a context and to recognize it's part of an ecosystem that's my hockey stick of learning, right? And it's been super interesting to me to understand how much I didn't know, to what you were talking about earlier. And I think where I go in those situations is like, just figure it out. Persistence, have a little courage. Like, I think it's hard to admit that this is a new frontier. You don't know anything about this, and you're being thrust into this kind of experience where you need to learn quickly. But I have a little mantra I say to myself, and I've said it to some people on my team in moments of need, but it's head down, do work, help people. Like, so that's my default. I just go back to like, okay, you can figure this out. Put your head down, get to work, make something that helps somebody, and get it out there, because it's probably better than what they have now, which might in some cases be nothing.
I love that. And it tracks back to what you said earlier about like just start small, start with something and go from there.
Yeah. Because if you're helping 20 people or 2,000 people, the 20 people are really glad you started. Like they're really glad to have gotten whatever you
Plus,
made.
you're probably going to have a much better shot at actually helping people if you only focus on 20 versus 2,000 to start with. Yeah. Well, Lizzy, thank you so much for coming to join me on this couch. And I'm definitely looking forward to more conversations.
Good. Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.